Good morning. It's good to see everybody. I'm getting over a 3-week disease that someone gave me. I don't know who it was, but I have some ideas. It happened the last service that we had, so someone coughed on me or hugged me or something, so I am keeping an eye out on you guys now. If I do cough a bit, the sickness is over. I just have this congestion that won't go away. So if you guys do ever think about me this week and you pray that God would take this cough from me, that He would liberate it from me. Never mind. So welcome to Covenant Community Church, where we exist to equip you guys, the church, to proclaim Jesus and live out His teachings. Some really cool things that we want to do this new year starts with a sermon series that I've been kind of wrestling through of what do we want to talk through, teach through this first month of the year. We're doing our fast. We're starting to think through how are we dedicating some time to God. We did it last year as well, where we took the first 21 days of the year, we fasted. But really what I want us to look at is how do we reframe the way that we think, the way that we view things. And one of the really big things about following Christ is He calls us to change the way that our mind works, the way that we think about things, the way we view things. And so when we're saved, we're not just saved for life and eternity, but we're also saved to live a certain way here, but not just live a certain way, to look at things a certain way, to think about things a certain way, to view things a certain way. And so when I was praying through this, I was thinking, okay, I think not just doing like a theological teaching where we teach through different theology that, how do I think about God? That'll be there at some point, but not this series. But I thought about how do we reshape our worldview? How do we reshape the way we view things around us? And so I talked with Luigi, kind of like I talked about a year ago. And so we talked, sorry, we talked through, I'm funnier than I think I am. But I was talking with Luigi about how do we formulate this in a way that makes sense and is not just a bunch of like random stuff in my head. And so we sat down and we talked about looking at worldview, looking at truth, looking at morality or ethics. How do I make the right decision? How do I even know what the right decision is? And then lastly, how do I interact with my neighbors? How do I interact with the people around me? And each one of these weeks, I'm going to have a time for questions and answers. And so, we'll pray to dismiss, and I'll stay up here. If you guys have questions, I'd love to answer those for you, especially if they're dealing with different things that we're talking about, or if they're just a question about theology of, why does God allow children in Africa to go hungry? Just different things. I'd love to spend time answering those questions because I figure that people don't often get much time to ask these questions. And so every week, Luigi will be next week. I won't be here, so he'll be answering questions, hopefully to the best of his ability, and if not, then to just ask me next week. Yeah, just ask me the following week. So without further ado, this sermon series is called Christlike Thinking, and one of the cool things that we did is we made a devotional that you guys can take. It's in the back at the table back there. You can take it home with you. There's 5 devotionals per week for this month. And the last week is going to be challenging just because it has some things in there that are a little difficult, but it's meant to be offensive. We took some of the parables of Jesus and modernized them. All we did was put modern titles for the different people that He associated with them. And it'll be a little challenging, but that's the point. Jesus wanted to offend the people who were listening to it to prove a point. And the same is for us, is we're going to get offended a little bit, but it's to prove a point that Jesus is trying to make when it answers the question, who is my neighbor? Who am I supposed to care about? Who am I supposed to love and interact with? So my encouragement is in here. I could read it, but you guys can read it at home. I put a little pastor's note in there. It's my encouragement for the devotional. Just to encourage you guys on how to read it, how to look at it. And so if you guys will bow your heads with me, we'll pray, and then we'll get into this. Lord, thank you for this time that we get to spend as a church to fast, dedicate some time to you, whether it's food or technology or coffee or whatever it is. Lord, would you meet us in this season? Would you allow your Holy Spirit to integrate so deeply into our lives during this moment that we would be in tune with your words, we'd be in tune with what you're saying. God, that when we read your word throughout this month of fasting and dedicating time to you, that you would illuminate it to us, that it would make sense, that it would click, that we'd understand the things that we're reading. And would you remind us today as we listen to your word and we hear of your word, that your word is a lamp at our feet and a light on our path, that it's meant to guide us and change us and direct us into all things. And we pray this in Jesus' mighty name. And we all said, amen. So our first topic is we're looking at Romans chapter 8. And it's really to reshape the way that we view the world. Because in reality, Christ has called us to a reality, a view of reality. It's called metaphysics. It means the study of the things that are real, even though they're like out there and weird and strange. But God has called us to understand reality in the way that he designed it. There's so many ideas out there in which we can understand the way the world works or the way that things work, but God has created things in a specific order, in a specific way, for us to look at things and to understand it very specifically. And so I'm going to be reading out of verse 18 through 25, Romans 8, 18 through 25. And it says this, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longings of the creation eagerly await for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be set free from its slavery to corruption, into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together now, until now. And not only this, but we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. For in hope we were saved. In hope that is seen is not hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we eagerly wait for it." So Romans 8 is teaching us something very specific. It's teaching us that the Christian life is not just about believing the right things, but it's also about seeing the world around us rightly. It's about viewing and understanding reality in the way that God designed it. Paul shows us something specific. He shows us that the world feels broken and why it feels broken. He says it feels broken, and we see it as broken because God has subjected the world to futility. If you guys look back at Genesis, we're starting to frame our understanding of the universe. When we look back at Genesis, there's a curse put on the earth. And it's a curse that comes as a result of Adam's sin, his transgression against God. And he says, because of you, the ground is cursed. And from heavy labor, you're going to eat your food. You're going to toil away. Thorns are going to grow out of the ground. Vines are going to come up and eat your plants. Weeds are going to grow amongst your crops. All these curses are placed onto the earth because of human sin. And so Paul tells us the way that we view the world is important. And so when we begin to think about things, the biggest question that people ask is, are people inherently good? Are they inherently evil? What does that mean? It means that at the core of each person, are they good or are they bad? And that shapes the way that we view people. That shapes the way that we understand society and the people around us. And the narrative of the Bible and what Paul is saying is that at the core, people are broken. At the core, things are broken. And what we're going to talk about in the devotional, I think it's day 2, is the idea of the broken mirror. Is this idea that we were designed to reflect God's goodness. We were designed well and perfect. God says it is good when he creates us. He says it twice. And so when we are created, we're designed as an image, a mirror, to reflect the glory of God, to reflect God to creation, to reflect God to each other. But what happens is when we sin, that mirror is broken, it's cracked. And if you guys have ever tried to look at yourself in a cracked mirror, it's kind of distorted. And that's the reality of life, is that humanity is distorted from the original purpose that God designed it for. And that's what Paul is showing us here. He's showing us that there's futility that everything is created in because of that brokenness of purpose. Suffering is a reality of life. Why? Because there's a brokenness in the world. There's a brokenness in humanity. There's a brokenness in the people around us. And so when we're understanding that this life, there's suffering in it. Paul says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us." He's acknowledging that there is suffering. He's saying that the reality of this world is that there's suffering in it. There's brokenness, there's suffering. But he also says that that brokenness, that suffering, does not compare to the glory that's going to come. He says that the Christian mind, the way that we view the world, is a realist. We don't have this false sense of optimism, but we know the reality is that the world's broken. But we also know that there's a hope in the future, that there's hope coming up where he says it's not to be compared with the glory that's to be revealed to us. He says that all the suffering that we endure into this earth is temporary because there's hope in the future. There's something coming up that we can look forward to. The way that we see the world determines the way that we live in it. And that's a big thing. When we're understanding our worldview, when we're understanding the things around us, we have to look to how do we see the world? And that determines the way I behave in the world. If I view people as inherently evil, then I'm going to treat them like they're evil. If I view them as inherently good, I'm going to treat them as they're good. But if I understand them the way that the Bible teaches, is that they're inherently broken, then I can have compassion for them. Then I can love them the way that Jesus loves them. I can treat them the way that Christ has taught us to treat them. If I see people as inherently evil, I keep people at a distance. If I see people as inherently good, I bring them in. But then what happens? People are evil. People are bad. People do mess up, and so I get hurt. And so I begin to think, okay, well, now I need to go to the opposite. They're inherently evil, and I keep them pushed away. But when we see them the way the Bible rightly teaches us to, is that people are inherently broken. It allows us to heal and mend those wounds to be able to love and to have compassion for people. So how does this change our view of things around us? Well, one, it teaches us that the world's not meaningless, that God has designed the world around us for a purpose, for a reason. And He designed all the people and created them for a purpose and for a reason. So the world's not meaningless. That means that there is meaning, there is purpose to life. The second is that people are not accidents. No one's an accident. No one happens by accident. But God has designed and instilled and given people purpose, every single person. There is no accident for God. There may be accidents for us. There may be oopsies for us. But everyone was created for purpose. And that's the beautiful thing about the Bible, is that everyone is created in the image of God, even though that image may be broken. Even though that mirror that was initially designed to reflect God may be broken. And life has direction and purpose. And that's the beautiful thing, is that every person has direction and purpose in their life, even if they're not following that direction and purpose. So, God creates the world then in glory and not futility. So the way that we see the world determines the way we live in it. If we see the world as meaningless, then we live without purpose. If we see the world as broken beyond repair, then we live desperate, in despair. We live without hope. We live knowing that nothing's going to change. But if we see the world as God's creation that's broken by sin, is in the process of being redeemed, and is awaiting renewal, then it changes the way that we live today, right? It changes the way we see things, because we know that everyone's broken somehow. We know that God is in the process of redeeming people who come to Him, and we know that one day there's going to be a moment of complete renewal where God changes everything and He restores everything back to how He originally designed it. Then it changes the way that we live now. I can live free knowing there's hope, knowing that the sufferings that I deal with now are not to compare with the hope in the future. That means I can look towards the future and say, one day I won't endure this suffering anymore. One day it'll be different. The gospel doesn't just tell us how to get to heaven. It teaches us how to live here on earth and how to view the things around us. The way that we see the world determines the way that we live in it. So God created this world for glory, not futility. If we kind of look back at Genesis, again, the creation narrative, I go back to that constantly because it teaches us a lot about God. It teaches us a lot about his purpose for humanity and who we are called to be. We learn in Genesis that God created the world good and purposeful. He creates things and he says it is good. And then he creates something and he says this is good. And then he creates something and it is good. And he creates it full of his glory. But now, in our time, it's no longer what it was supposed to be. It's not glory anymore. It's actually marred. It's distorted. It's broken because of what humanity has done. So, creation then, in this story here, or in the writings of Paul here, Romans 8:18 through 19 says this, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longings of creation eagerly await for the revealing of the sons of God." What he's saying is the creation itself is waiting for something to happen. It's waiting for a moment in history where the sons of God will be revealed. What does that mean? It means that it's waiting for the moment in which God comes back and restores order for all things, and we're raised from the dead, and one day everything is different. So creation itself is personified as waiting and longing. It's created, or it's shown to us as something that is expectant of something to happen. That's why we see these constant concerns about earthquakes and all these things happening, because the earth is cursed and it's longing in its brokenness for something to change. And we can often talk about, well, we're not doing enough to protect the earth, or we're not, conserving enough. There's never going to be a point in time where we can conserve enough, because the earth is a ticking time. It's ending at some point where God is going to restore all things and bring creation anew. And so at some point the earth is going to, I don't understand too much how it's going to end, but it's either going to be the end of the earth, or God's going to kind of merge everything into new creation, or I don't know. There's so many theories out there on how it's going to happen. No one knows. God hasn't said specifically how it's going to go down. But one day all things will be made new. And how it happens, we don't know. But we do know is that the earth is ticking and waiting and longing. And the closer we get to the return of Jesus, the more that it's going to long, the more that there's going to be earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis and all these other things, because the earth is groaning, it says. It's groaning as if it has birth pains, waiting and expecting for the moment in which it gives birth. And that giving birth will be the coming of Christ and the restoration of all things. This implies intention and meaning in what God is doing. That means that God hasn't allowed everything to be meaningless. So when we're looking at life and we're starting to think, life sucks right now, it's meaningless, nothing matters, whatever else that you can say about things, nothing is meaningless. There's always meaning in something, because God has designed everything with purpose and intentionality. Humanity was meant to reflect God's glory into creation. We see it in the beginning where God says, name all the animals. He gives the task of naming things to Adam. And to name something is to claim ownership of it, to claim possession of it. And so Adam is exerting authority that God has given him over creation by naming things. It reveals that the true nature of the sons of God is tied into creation. It's tied into the earth. It's tied into what the future looks like, is that we are to be here on earth with Christ. Everyone, has this image of us in heaven one day where all we're doing is standing in the throne room worshiping God. And it's a nice thought, but that's not what the Bible teaches is what eternity looks like. Eternity looks like what the Garden of Eden was, what God's original intention for humanity was, where we're to cultivate the earth and we're to show the glory of God to all the things, and we're to worship God through our lives and our actions and our service. There will be worship, and I'm sure there will be singing, because God created music and He created the beauty of art and everything. But God designed us to work in His garden. The earth was made as a garden. The earth was made for work. And so we're not going to be, tired and labor burnt and, exhausted. That's a curse. That's something that God applied to the earth when humanity sinned. But we see that one day Christ teaches us in the Word that there will be a new creation and there will be a restoration to what the garden looked like, where God will walk amongst us and we'll walk with Him and we'll live life with Him. So we see the world is not meaningless, people are not accidents, and life has direction and purpose. We do, however, live in a broken world that's broken by sin and marked by its groaning pains of like childbirth. We see in Romans 8:20 through 22, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it, meaning it's subjected to futility, meaning a decay towards dying, because God subjected it to it, because God cursed the earth. In hope that the creation itself would also be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers in the pains of childbirth together until now. So we see that God cursed the earth, and that creation itself will one day be set free from that curse, from that corruption. And so we see it's going to happen at the same time as the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And so when Christ returns, when He brings His people to Him, when He meets them, all things will be made new. This futility that it talks about speaks about this frustration and decay, this disorder that's on the earth, that's happening, that creation suffers because of humanity's fall. The groaning implies pain with expectation, not in despair. That groaning is almost like in Revelation, where it talks about the voice of the martyrs under the throne, and they're crying out, "How long, O Lord? How long until you avenge us?" And so we're seeing that the creation is groaning because it's waiting for something to happen. It's waiting for Christ to return and change all things. This shows us the suffering is real, but it doesn't tell us the suffering is normal, meaning that it's the way that God intended. God did not intend for us to suffer. Suffering is a result of human fall, or the fall of humanities, of the broken mirror of humanity. And so suffering is not normal in terms of created order, but suffering is something that we endure. It shows us to view the world as real, or evil being a real thing, suffering being temporary, because one day there will be a change and all those things will be restored, and that brokenness is not a surprise to us. When we look to the people around us and we see that they're broken, it should not surprise us, because we know the people are broken image bearers of God, that they don't reflect God well, the way that He intended them to. So evil is real, suffering's temporary, and brokenness doesn't surprise us. So the world is on the way to being redeemed, and it's awaiting renewal. One of the big things that Romans teaches us here is in verse 23-25, it says, "Not only this, but we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves." He's saying that not just the earth is groaning, waiting for something, but our spirits, we ourselves, are groaning for something to happen. He says, eagerly waiting for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. So what is this saying? Is that Paul's saying that there's a reality in the Christian life, that one day we're going to have a new body. My body that begins to hurt, my back's hurting, I have some shoulder pain, I don't know why I do that, and I have an impingement here. It's so annoying. It's probably how I sleep. But all these different things, the decaying of my body over time, is temporary, because one day Christ has promised that we will be resurrected in bodies like His. He says one day we will be raised again to live life like Him. And so one day we'll have a new body. And it's a weird concept to think about. But the truth is that God, when He says something, He's not lying. And it's been proven time and time again in each one of our lives. So when God says one day we'll have a new body, He means it. And so one of the beliefs foundational of Christian life is that there is a future hope, that Christ will come back and we'll have new bodies and we'll live life with Him. It says, continuing, for we in hope we were saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he has already seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we eagerly wait for it. He says that we haven't seen our new bodies. We haven't seen the resurrection of the dead. We haven't seen Christ. We haven't seen him come back. But if we hope for the things that he talks about, then we will eagerly wait for it with perseverance. We will persevere in our waiting for these things to happen. That means that, like Paul says, all these sufferings that we deal with on earth don't compare to the hope that I'm going to have one day. That means that my sufferings here on earth, they don't compare. I can wait. I can endure suffering because I know one day there's going to be something new, something better in the future. We believers, we share in groaning with hope with the earth. We share in that groaning that something is going to change one day, that there's hope for a future with Christ. Our salvation includes our body. It includes creation. It's not just our souls. We don't leave our bodies in terms of that we're never going to have a physical body again, that we're just a spirit floating around somewhere in the ether. The Bible promises us that one day we're going to have a new body. And so Christ is saving us, both body and soul, and also creation. Revelation talks about the new heavens and the new earth. We're not just going to be, little angels, with wings and little cupid bows on clouds, like, the Italians painted. But we're going to have a real body on a real creation with Christ walking. It says that Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem, will come down onto the new earth, and we will abide with Christ. The Christian hope points us to the future. It's orientated in the future. We know that something will happen one day, and our waiting on this side of eternity is not passivity, it's actually our faith. It's acting out our faith. When we endure our hope, or we endure our hurts, our troubles, our brokenness, we're actually waiting in faith for the things that are coming in the future. So how does this change the way we view the world? Well, it shapes the way that we understand suffering and glory. That helps us understand, or that we're living in that in-between, in the middle. I remember when I was a student in ministry, I was in college, and we had an Anglican pastor come in. And I had been going through a season where I was super burnt out of ministry. I had been working at this point as a youth pastor and then a young adult pastor for about 5 years maybe. And I was working under a Spanish pastor. I was driving like 40 minutes to Everett to serve there. And I felt every time the ministry was growing, I was the young adult pastor, the senior pastor would do something to like kill it. And then I had to restart from scratch, grow, and then he'd kill it. And then it was just constant. And I was getting burnt out. And I remember I was sitting in this class, and we had a panel of pastors. And they were talking about being burnt out. And I asked the Anglican pastor, I said, how do you avoid being burnt out? And he said, you don't. And I was like, what do you mean you don't? And he said, as a pastor, you live in the in-between of being burnt out and loving what you do. He said, there's this middle ground that you learn to live in. And it's because the world's broken and you're dealing with broken people and you're enduring brokenness that you're on that cusp of burning out, but then you see all the beauties and the blessings of leading people and life change. And he said, you learn to live in the in-between. And that's really what this life is about, is learning to live in the in-between of the brokenness of things, of the suffering and the glory that's to come. We're learning to live in that in-between of these two different extremes and learning to walk with Christ despite maybe sometimes falling into the suffering or experiencing the glory of Christ. And so we learn to live there in the middle. It shapes the way that we understand hope with endurance, that we know we can endure hard things because God has given us hope. And lastly, that faithfulness matters because we understand that there is a renewal coming one day, that there is a restoration to all things that one day will come. So my application is this: how do we learn to live from this renewed worldview? Or as the sermon series is titled, with Christlike thinking. How do we think like Christ with a renewed vision of our worldview? Well, we see the way that we see the world determines the way that we live in it. I've said this a few times already, but Romans 8 calls us to see creation with reverence, to understand it as being created and designed by God with purpose, to see people with compassion, to know that creation and people are broken. The images that they bear are broken. They're glass windows that have been cracked and shattered that we're looking to them through. But each person is created, they're fallen, and they're in need of redemption. Everyone, even your spouse. So when you're dealing with annoying things that your spouse does, or frustrations or anger that comes from what your spouse is doing, remember to see them with compassion because they're broken and they're being redeemed by Christ and they're in the process of redemption. We see suffering with hope and not despair because I know that suffering is temporary. It may feel like eternity to us, but suffering is temporary because one day Christ will renew all things and all things will be made right. And we live faithfully today because we know that God in Christ is coming back. We know that Christ is coming back. How many of you guys have ever watched the movie The Chronicles of Narnia? I love that movie growing up. The old one, the 1990-something one, used to give me nightmares because of the people in costumes and whatnot. But The Chronicles of Narnia has this underlying theme of expectation, of hope, of waiting. And it starts with a world that is in oppression from torment from the white witch, the evil witch. And there's this saying that they constantly say in the story where they're constantly saying, Aslan's on the move. And they're like, what does that even mean? Who's Aslan? And we see that because the person who wrote this, I believe it was C.S. Lewis. Yeah, C.S. Lewis. It was a Christian. He tied a lot of Christian themes into his books. And he tied in this understanding that one day there is a restoration to all things, that there's a hope. And so we understand the Christian lifestyle when we see the people who are living under the oppression of the white witch. And for us, when we're looking at it in our context, it's understanding that we live under the oppression of sin and under the oppression of Satan and his minions. And the beauty is that story teaches us that even living under that oppression, we know that Christ is on the move. We know that he's doing something. We know that he's working, even when they didn't see him. They heard rumors about him. They knew about him from a distance. They didn't see him until one day he returned and everything was made right. And that's the beauty of the gospel, is one day Christ will return and everything will be made right.